Wow, I'm with Lee Mendelson. And if you don't know who he is, you should, because he's very important to animation on TV and just production and making things happen and being a creative and being inspired. Those are all things that you excel at and you continue to excel at.
Sometimes I do, sometimes I don't.
Well, it doesn't always win, but if you keep going, that's one of the
I may get lucky one day, that's right.
You mean like the Emmys you've already won? Yeah, I think you've done all right so far.
Yeah.
So not only, because I just want to throw out to you guys, not only are you someone who has a very important place in the history of animated specials on TV, but you continue to be a producer and to create. And that's something else I want to remind everybody is that, you know what, no matter what ideas you get and when you get them, it doesn't matter if you're 18 or 80 or you're a guy or a girl or whatever it is you are, go after it, because that you are a really good example of continuing to make
Particularly about the
happen.
80 part, yes.
Yeah, I think that's very inspiring because sometimes in Hollywood, age is a factor.
Not in the cartoon business.
Yeah, which is wonderful. Right. So, you were instrumental in making the Charlie Brown Christmas special happen, but not just that, every Charlie Brown special happened. And so, can you talk a little bit about how so there was a commercial, and you talked, it was a Ford commercial, that you talked Schulz into...
Oh, no, that was Bill. Bill Melendez did a commercial about 1962. What happened with us, I did a documentary on Willie Mays, and after I did, for NBC, after I did it, I was reading a Charlie Brown comic strip where he lost his 800th baseball game, and it popped into my mind, we've just done the world's greatest ball player, let's go do the world's worst. So I called Charles Schulz on the phone. His phone was listed in the phone book up in Sebastopol, California, and I told him, you know, I'd like to come up and talk to you about doing a documentary about you and Charlie Brown. And he said, I'm really not interested. I just want to focus on the comic strip. I don't want anything to do with Hollywood or New York. And I was about to hang up. And I said, by the way, did you happen to see the Willie Mays special last month? He said, as a matter of fact, I did. Willie's a hero of mine, and I love the show. Why do you ask? And I said, well, we did that.
That was me.
I said, my two-man crew did that, and that's what we want to do with you. And there was a long pause, and then I remember this so clearly. He said, well, if Willie Mays can trust you with his life, I guess I can trust you with mine. And that's how we met. And I went up and we met, and we did a documentary where he drew the characters and talked about the characters. And I assumed it would sell, just like the Willie Mays show, but in true Charlie Brown fashion, it did not sell.
Wow.
However, for that show, we hired a musician called Vince Guaraldi.
Yes.
And he wrote a song called Linus and Lucy. Mm-hmm. And one of the groups who'd seen the documentary loved the music and called 2 years later. And they said, well, we can't buy the documentary, but would your creative group be interested in doing a Christmas special for Coca-Cola? Wow. Have you thought about doing one? I said, oh, absolutely. We think about it all the time. And he said, well, we need an outline down in Atlanta on Monday. It was Wednesday. So send us what you have and we'll see what happens. So I called Mr. Schulz on the phone. I called Mr. Melendez, because we'd worked together on the documentary 2 years before. And I said, I think I just sold a Charlie Brown Christmas. And they said, what's that? And I said to Schulz, that's something you're going to write tomorrow. So Bill flew up from Hollywood, and I drove up from San Francisco, and he did write it on a Thursday. Those days we sent it by Western Union on a Friday, and Monday they called up and said, okay, let's do a Charlie Brown Christmas. So Willie Mays is responsible for a Charlie Brown Christmas.
That's like the best story.
Yeah.
I love that.
Yeah.
So it happened. Now let me ask you, what happened to the documentary? Where is that? Is it
about 3 years later? We updated it and won an Emmy.
Well, there you go.
So you never know. Yeah.
Well, that's always the way of it. Once it becomes in fashion, people are actually willing to promote it.
And now it's 50 years later. We're doing the 50th anniversary of A Charlie Brown Christmas for ABC this winter, and the documentary will be as part of that show.
That's wonderful.
Everything's come full circle. Yeah.
And what's going to be part of that documentary?
No, this will be
the new one.
A musical variety special. It's going to be hosted by Kristen Bell, and we're going to have 3 famous people who we haven't selected yet to sing Charlie Brown songs. So it'll be a mixture of new and then the highlights of the past 50 years.
I love that.
And that's going to go on in November 30th.
Which is a very...
And then they're going to follow it with the Christmas show, so that's a big night for us.
I was going to say, that's a really big night on television.
Right.
That's very exciting.
Yeah, it certainly is for us.
And so it's not you haven't started producing it yet,
Well, today was the first production meeting, yeah.
That's really exciting.
Yeah.
So once you got the Christmas special out, and it was a huge hit.
Yes, half the country tuned in.
Wow.
In those days, there were 3 networks. And no matter what you did, you got a big audience. But we were flabbergasted because we got 49% of the TV sets that night were watching us, which is, today if you get a 5% share, you're happy.
That's a big deal.
So then they bought 4 more shows, and then we went on to do 50.
The 4 more shows that they bought, were you already sure what you were going to do?
Oh, no, we did Charlie Brown's All-Stars because we love baseball, all of us. And again, the baseball connection with Mays. Then we did The Great Pumpkin. And then You're in Love, Charlie Brown. And then they bought 4 more. And then from then on, we did about one a year for 50 years. That's how we got to 50 shows.
So once you did the first show, and in retrospect, a lot of people talk about how important it is in terms of it being the first special that has a religious aspect to it.
When we sat down to plot the show, we thought about different elements. It had to be winter, it had to be in the snow, there should be a school play. And all of a sudden, Mr. Schulz said, well, also I'm going to have, I think we ought to have Linus read from the Bible. And Bill and I looked at each other as cartoon makers, wondering, well, nobody's ever done an animation from the Bible. And we said, are you sure you want to do that? And he said, well, if we don't, who will? Because if we don't do the true meaning of Christmas, why bother? So that's how Linus ended up reading from the Bible.
What's cool about that is that Linus is a philosopher, so it can be taken not so much as Christianity, but as something that's a beautiful story That's
exactly the tone of it. It was meant to be the spirit of Christmas, if you will. Yeah, right.
And
we had a funny thing. One of the critics said, Mendelson wrote the opening and closing songs. And I called him at Philadelphia Inquirer, I remember. I said, what are you talking about? I said, I know I wrote the lyrics to Christmastime is Here, the opening song, but I certainly didn't write Hark the Herald Angels Sing. And he said, no, but Felix Mendelson did. And I said, boy, that's pretty sharp. I thought that was pretty cool.
You wrote Christmastime is Here?
It was an instrumental. The show was done, and I thought the show was a little slow, and I said, maybe we ought to get some lyrics and have some kids sing to the lyrics. And I called all my friends who wrote music, and they're all busy. And I literally took out an envelope. I remember I wrote some lyrics, to the melody. And that's how we got Christmastime is Here. And if I ever thought I was going to write a song that would be covered by 100 people, like Tony Bennett and Mariah Carey and Barry Manilow, I would have said, you're crazy. But that's how that song all came about. So Felix Mendelson and I came together.
Beginning and the end.
Yes, right. I thought that was very perceptive.
And also really wonderful. So you're one of those people that's written like the White Christmas. I mean, it's a huge.
By default.
Well.
I mean, it was a mistake, but it happened. It was a nice mistake. Yeah.
It's a wonderful mistake. And Vince wrote
he had already written a melody, and that was the opening melody when we saw the show when they were skating, and that's when I said maybe we could get some kids to sing it. And Vince knew a St. Paul's choir up our way, and he went and got the kids, and that's how we got that whole thing going.
What possessed you to hire Vince Guaraldi in the first place?
I was driving over the Golden Gate Bridge in '63, listening to a jazz station because I was trying to figure out what kind of music to use for the documentary. And I heard Cast Your Fate to the Wind, which I hadn't heard before.
Yeah.
And they came on and said, this just won a Grammy, and this guy is from San Francisco. So we hooked up in San Francisco, and he wrote all the music for the documentary. And then 2 years later, we hired him to do the movie. And then he went on to do our first 15 specials, did all the music. And the music was fundamental to the success of the show, all the shows. And I think if we hadn't had that music, maybe we would have had one show and be gone. But I think that was one of the key elements.
I totally agree.
Yeah.
I think it's one of the most wonderful examples of music and
well, it just film. Fit. As soon as I heard Cast Your Fate, I said, if we could get something, And when he called up and said, I've written a song, and he played Linus and Lucy over the phone, I knew something in my head said, that's going to be somehow very important in all our lives. I don't know why I thought that, but it was so perfect you know, because it was adult-like and childlike, and it proved to be
And
the
joyful.
case. Yeah, joyful. And all his music was like that. He was unbelievable. West Coast jazz, we called it. So.
Were there other times in the history of when you were creating these specials that something like that clicked in your head where you went, this is how it needs to happen?
I can't think of that offhand. Once in a while, either Mr. Schulz or Melendez or myself would get an idea for a show. Once it was a nightmare. Schulz had a nightmare about Snoopy being a dog at the North Pole, you know, joining a dog sled team. And he called up and said, I'd like to do a show about that, and we did. So you never knew where an idea would come from. Or I liked Saturday Night Fever a lot, and I said, it'd be great if we could do something with Snoopy, and we did Flash Beagle.
I remember Flash Beagle.
So some ideas would, you know, come out, an idea for a whole show, or an idea that would lead to a show, and we never knew where the idea would come from. But 50 times we got 50 ideas, you know, from someplace, from somewhere.
I love Snoopy Come Home.
Snoopy Come Home, we had the wonderful music again from the Sherman Brothers. And I think that's probably the best of the 4 movies that we did. We found
I had the board game.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
I didn't even know there was one.
Oh my God. It's like Shoots and Ladders, only it's
There's
Snoopy
some really,
Come Home.
that Lila's theme is one of the really beautiful.
It's so
and
poignant.
it was a thrill to work with the Sherman Brothers, of course. That was a big deal for us. In fact, I just saw them a few months ago. I saw the one that's still alive. We had a meeting after 40 years. Like the time went like that, you know. So we were blessed with our musicians. Then we got David Benoit, who for the last 30 years has taken over and plays all of the Guaraldi music all over the world. So we've been very lucky, music-wise.
So what do you think, in terms of your experience of when you talk to fans and stuff, what do you think is the single most influential aspect of the cartoons?
Well, around the holiday times, we often hear from people, you know, hey, it's the one time the whole family gets around the TV, you know, and we can all share it together. And I think most of our audience over the years has been women and kids, or moms and kids, more than, say, men or whatever. So most of our reaction comes from that side of the spectrum. But I think it's just the family can all get together and enjoy it. And it's a time, Schulz always said, there's always a market for innocence in this country, which is proven by every Pixar movie that comes out, every Disney movie that comes out. And I think it's the innocence of all the shows and the simplicity of all the shows. And the fact that everybody, Schulz once said that Charlie Brown's a kid you'd like to be your next door neighbor. And I think there's just an identity because we all have problems every day and we have to endure them and overcome them. And I think that's the key to the whole thing, that he always keeps coming back, you know. And I think we all identify with that.
One of the animators I talked to said that he thought that Schulz had split his character, his personality, into all of the Peanuts characters.
Well, no, in a sense, he once said to me that Charlie Brown is the way he was and is, and Snoopy was the way he wished he could be. That was his fantasy life. And in that sense, he did that. Yeah, that's for sure.
I think that's the way we all feel about it, pretty much.
Right.
Well, thank you so
You're
much
very
for
welcome.
talking to me
Okay.
and for sharing some really great stories with the fans.
And any viewers out there, we always appreciate it.
Oh, I think we're all going to watch the Christmas special this year, the new one. Thank you so much.
Nice meeting you.
Absolutely,
Okay,
thank you.